Hey guys, Dan here with Battlefield Curator, and I want to go over some of the phases that I think military surplus collectibles go through over time. When you think about it, military surplus collectibles can be seen as an alternative asset, and during times of uncertainty and doubt, they can become very valuable, especially the weaponry. Some of the gear can be used for survival, though because they're collectible, you probably don't want to use it for that. When some of these collectibles go at auction, they can sell for a pretty high price, depending on what kind of item it is. So generally speaking, not all collectibles go through these phases. I want to iterate that again, but there are some that you notice that go through phases like this. And also another thing that can increase the value of some of these is when there are laws put in place to block the importation of some of these items. So without further ado, let's talk about phase number one, which I think is the phase, the import phase. The phase that rifles, weapons, gear, that all gets imported into the US and it's abundantly available and super cheap. The one thing about this phase is that it's probably so available at the time that nobody really thinks about them being collectible. People buy the stuff up, they use it on a daily basis, they use the rifles to go hunting. You know, you saw this back in the 60s, the 50s and the 60s, right after World War II. So many countries liquidated their surplus, so many countries wanted to get semi-auto over time. New rifles, new weapons were being designed. The bolt action ones were getting phased out, so a lot of those went for really cheap on the US surplus market, especially after a huge ramp up. A lot of countries did ramp up for World War II, so a lot of surpluses out there. And sadly, some of this surplus got sent to foreign nations, which later used a lot of those against the US. But either way, we did find a lot of the surplus in the US, and they're just abundantly available and super cheap. And that's the really cool thing about the first phase, is you have to realize that when a weapon is in a, or when a collectible is in a first phase, import phase, because that's a time that you want to get on board and buy those collectibles up. Now, at the time, they might not seem like collectibles, and sometimes they might not turn out to be collectibles because, let's say, you know, they're just not that favorable. But you never know, and if you like history, you like military history, you like collecting, you like, you're a shooter and you like taking some of these things to the range, but you know, you definitely want to take care of some of these when you get them in the phase one category. There's a few reasons why some of these collectibles aren't in the greatest shape these days that were imported in the 50s and 60s. It was a great time to get collectibles because import laws weren't really in place yet. So some of these weren't actually import marked. But in this phase, you did see some things that nowadays the owner would probably regret. There was still a lot of hunting going on, so some of these were actually converted to a sporterized rifle for hunting purposes, which diminished the collectible value. Another thing is that some of these rifles were just left out in sheds, they were left in attics. They weren't really taken care of. Maybe they were left in a house without proper climate control, because climate control was still a new thing back in the 50s and 60s. Not every household, and I mean even today, not every household still has proper climate control. You know, when you look at it that way, there's just, you know, some of these in phase one didn't make it to the end phase. So the next phase is phase two, is where it's after the import phase. You might start seeing a little bit more of the collectibles from phase one start getting dispersed through like shops, but they're not really getting imported anymore. The surplus is kind of dried up. Maybe you might see a few batches come in here and there throughout some years. It could take decades for phase two, you know, the second phase to kind of, you know, teeter out, but there starts to be more of a following for some of these because you can't find them very much anymore, or they're a little bit harder to find, or their value's gone up, and when they do get imported, the price is a lot higher than what most people expect. So during phase 2, you probably still wouldn't mind buying some of these collectibles, especially if they're in great shape. If you find them at a local shop, you might say, hey, you know, I haven't seen that anymore. Get imported. Those were imported, you know, a few decades ago and in abundant numbers. They used to be in barrels at your local Roses store, but now they're a little bit harder to find and they're a little bit more valuable. So phase 2, more valuable, a little bit harder to find, and spotty import batches. So yeah. Now we talk about phase 3. Phase 3, I'd like to say, is probably when you probably see a height in some of the prices. You see ridiculous auction prices on the same collectibles from phase 1 and that have matured decades later into phase 3. And when you do find them, they're at a store or something, they're really high priced. Trying to find these at a small town shop, you might find one or two, you know, throughout the country, within a few years that somebody might not know what they have, and you know, you might be lucky and find them for cheap, but more likely than not, everywhere knows about them. Everyone wants one. They're super valuable, or they're just super rare, or they have a niche collector following. And either way, if you do find these get imported during phase 3, they are going to be in very bad condition. These are bottom of the barrel surplus now during phase 3. That somebody found them in a warehouse or something in Nepal, or a palace in Nepal, and so somebody found them in a warehouse in Ethiopia. So during phase 3, they're scarce, niche collector market. If they do get imported, they are in really bad condition. All right, and when I think about phase 4, I think about, hey, these rifles are now only available if you go to auction or you go to like maybe a specialty store. Maybe they're what you see like Civil War era weaponry. When you find them, it's like, whoa, am I really holding a piece of American history from the Civil War? Yeah, dude, that's a $8,000 rifle. That's a Spencer carbine. You might want to not put your fingerprints on that. These are museum collectibles. They might not even have so much of a following because they're so old. And only niche collectors collect them, and they go for a very high value. They sell at auction, and the better the condition, the more they'll go for. You know, stuff like that. So phase 4, you're not seeing them imported anymore, and the only way you can get a hold of them is through auction sites or very niche collector websites or shops. So yeah, food for thought. Some of these weapons coming out of World War II are starting to get dried up. It's just something I think you should think about. As the collector market grows, enthusiasm for these weapons grow. I think there's a larger niche and a larger following for some of these World War II and World War I weapons that come out. And I think, you know, the collector market is ever expanding. I do have a video linked in the description about collecting, and I think it's, one of the best times in history to be a collector. So let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. You know, do you think there should be another phase in there? Sometimes when I think about these collectible weapons, especially some of the World War II weapons, you know, there's some that are just hard to find, and there's some that you could still find. You know, when will we see some of the World War II weapons stop being imported into the country? I think we're in a phase 2, phase 3, probably more towards phase 3 right now for a lot of weapons that were used during World War II. So let me know what you guys think. Well, that's it for this video. I'll see you on the next one. If you enjoyed this kind of content, be sure to share with your compadres. And as always, be sure to learn history and curate history. Make it a great day.